Well, hello, and welcome to this morning's briefing titled High Impact Family Engagement in Schools, Supporting Families During the Pandemic and in its Aftermath. I'm Josh Kramer, Executive Vice President at the National Centers for Families Learning, and I'll be moderating today's session. This has truly been a remarkable year in terms of challenges that educators, students, and families have endured in the face of a global pandemic. And if there are silver linings, one is that it has made the importance of family engagement impossible to ignore. But before our panel describes their excellent work in family engagement, I'm very pleased to announce two esteemed guests that will join us throughout today's discussion. Congressman John Yarmuth of Kentucky will join us around 11:30. But right now, I would like to take the opportunity to welcome Congressman DeSaulnier, who has been a linchpin of the Statewide Family Engagement Centers. From drafting the language that was included in the Every Student Succeeds Act, to fighting to secure funding to operate the program. We will continue pushing to expand the program alongside Congressman DeSaulnier so that one day we could have a statewide family engagement center in his home state of California. Congressman DeSaulnier, have you had a chance to join us? All right, well, we knew that he could be a couple minutes late, so we will absolutely engage him when he gets here. Well, I think we put together a pretty good panel for today's discussion. Those panelists include Ambika Kapoor of the Carnegie Corporation, Helen Westmoreland from the National PTA Office, and Roger Garcia, the director of the NCFL Nebraska Family Engagement Center. Family engagement in education is more important now than ever before. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, family engagement was all too often viewed as an add-on for education systems. Today, we know it as a bedrock component. As the two pandemics of COVID-19 and our country's focused attention on racial disparities have laid generational inequity bare, it is more important now than ever before that we engage families in education. Now, we knew before the pandemic that high impact family engagement improved student academic achievement and attendance in addition to other benefits. It is also important to note that the positive impacts of family engagement are disproportionately more impactful for low-income communities of color. In short, family engagement can be a critical strategy to help remove barriers to keep ethnically diverse families from reaching their full potential. When we leave some families behind, our entire country pays the price. To that end, NCFL works to eradicate poverty through family-based education solutions. In response to COVID-19, NCFL had to immediately adapt programming to meet families where they are. Strategies included blended digital solutions, creative social distancing, distributions of books and take-home family learning materials, and the expansion of our digital Wonderopolis learning community. Central to this work are NCFL-led family engagement centers in Nebraska and Arizona, our collaborative efforts with the SFECs in Kentucky and Maryland, and our leadership of a national SFEC professional development network in collaboration with the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. It is our collective responsibility to ensure high-impact family engagement across the country, and while the first 12 U.S. Department of Education funded SFECs are an important starting point, we need robustly funded statewide infrastructure for family engagement in all 50 states. Now, the Senate has included a $5 million increase for SFECs in fiscal year 2021 spending proposal, and the House has also signaled its support for increasing funding. It is our hope that that Senate figure is enacted when Congress irons out their final spending package. The Carnegie Corporation has provided private support for our collective efforts to maximize the impact of SFECs. And today, we're fortunate to have with us Ambika Kapoor to share why they have placed a priority on family engagement and their support of Statewide Family Engagement Centers Professional Development Network, especially during a pandemic. Ambika, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Josh. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be here on this panel. As Josh said, I work at the Carnegie Corporation of New York in their education program. Carnegie is a grant-making foundation that invests in knowledge that inspires informed action for democracy, education, and international peace since 1911. And I just want to say that we are glad to partner with the National Center for Families Learning. And I was really honored that they asked me to join today to talk about the importance of family engagement, especially during the pandemic, which is now family engagement is more important than ever. At Carnegie Corporation, maybe we'll just go to the next slide. At Carnegie Corporation, we believe that when families are empowered as true partners in their children's education, students thrive, schools are stronger, and the whole community benefits. That's why we fund programs that bridge the gap between home and school. We want families to have access to the information they need to support their children's learning and for them to be able to act as effective advocates for change. And we do this with partnering with organizations like the National Center for Families Learning and their network of family engagement centers around the country, and the National PTA, who you will hear from today as well. And we consider, being a grant-making foundation, we consider them the real experts in supporting schools, districts, and families. Next slide, please. This work to strengthen family engagement across the country is part of an emerging focus on the home to school connection, something we've long believed is key to strengthening K-12 education. Teachers, families, and other stakeholders are realizing that in the age of COVID, in this time, education cannot happen unless parents are true collaborators in their kids' education. This new attitude may have been born out of necessity, but we are seeing that it has great potential for lasting change. Some of the research that we have commissioned by the foundation shows that family engagement is one of the biggest factors in educational outcomes across the board, but especially for students of color, low-income students, and students whose families speak languages other than English in the home. Family engagement, as Josh said, so I'm just reinforcing, is therefore a matter of equity as much as education, an increasing urgent concern that we are now seeing during the pandemic. According to a study that we had funded, which was released in April by the Northwest Evaluation Association, students were expected to return to school in the fall with significant learning loss. Up to 30% in reading skills and over 50% in math, especially among Black and Latino students. And getting them back on track will involve parents and caregivers as much as teachers. In fact, the Northwest Evaluation Association just released their latest results, which shows that the gap is even greater, especially for low-income students. So what does effective family engagement look like? We have published a paper, which you will see an image of on the right, but it has sort of 5 leverage areas on family engagement around attendance and data, but we'd like to say 2 of the most important issues schools must address, especially at this time. First, parents and caregivers need a much clearer understanding of how their kids are actually doing. And second, families need access to technology and avenues of communication that allow for meaningful conversations with teachers. So we have, in fact, as an example, funded an organization called Talking Points that is a technology app that translates parent-teacher communication into 140 languages. When we talk about low-income immigrant families who come into this country who do not speak English, and how do you communicate parents and teachers? How do parents and teachers communicate? So this is one example, but we feel this is an important priority going forward. Next slide, please. We work with many educational nonprofits that are working to direct their efforts to develop family engagement practices or solutions, and some examples that have been caused by the pandemic. So some examples that I wanted to share with you all about some bright spots. Student Achievement Partners is an organization that advises educators on how to best align their teaching to academic standards in math and literacy. And Seek Common Ground is another group that empowers families and advocacy organizations to have a greater voice in education policy and practice in their communities. Knowing that families were overwhelmed last spring by the sheer amount of information schools were sending them, these 2 organizations teamed up to create grade-specific family guides that provide a clear outline of what students are expected to learn this school year. Online resources that match the most important content and everyday activities, that reinforce learning. With this information, parents also have a tool to help them advocate for their children. And these guides were rolled out in the fall of this year. Next slide, please. Due to the new emphasis on digital learning platforms, some families are being left behind, especially those who do not regularly work with computers, who speak languages other than English at home, or who rely on elderly caregivers to supervise their kids' learning. An example here would be Common Sense Media, an organization that we support, which assists educators in teaching students how to become responsible consumers and creators of digital information. They're working within communities to make broadband available to lower-income students. Also, another boots on the ground advocacy group, Innovate Public Schools, is helping parents who may have spent little time on computer to set up Zoom calls or to join a virtual classroom to help their kids. Another successful model worth looking at is from the video here. That partners with employers to provide families across the country with access to affordable, high-quality, on-demand support, along with a path to a great education from preschool to college and beyond. There's this video for 2 minutes, which I might be taking up too much time. So maybe it's something that we can share after we can share to all the panelists after the webinar. It's this organization, why I wanted to share about who they are, is that they actually meet families where they're at. They meet families at their workplace and provide navigation or support to families to navigate school systems, especially during the pandemic. Another reason for another bright spot, or another reason for optimism, like I like to say, is that families are uniquely receptive to this, to developing stronger relationships with their schools and teachers in order to weather this current crisis. A recent study by another organization that we fund found that parents and caregivers are determined to get more involved with their children's education, to work closely with their schools, and to communicate effectively with teachers. In May, in a survey and a focus group, 67% of families said that they felt more connected with their child's day-to-day education than ever before, and 70% wanted to know more about lessons of their children had missed and how their schools plan to recover that lost ground. So all this to say that I've shared with you some examples of evidence of this increase in family engagement and the importance of it and how it's actually working and how parents are receptive to this. As Josh said, there's a silver lining in this pandemic showing that how important family engagement is. However, some of the problems for effective family engagement are daunting, system reform, but we hope that the will to solve them creatively and collaboratively exist. We've seen some bright spots, and I look forward to a discussion with all of you about how we shouldn't let's not miss this opportunity, how we should make these family engagement solutions more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambika, and thank you for your ongoing support of family engagement. It's incredible. Just for everybody who's tuning in today, if you have questions, we should have a little time at the end. You can put them in the question and answer feature on your Zoom link. With that, I would like to head to our next panelist, who is Helen Westmoreland from the National PTA Office. Helen, can you talk to us a little bit about why you think family engagement might be more important now than ever before?
Sure. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time to be here today. And thank you, Josh, and the National Centers for Families Learning for organizing this important conversation and inviting our two great champions for this work. I'm here today as the Director of National PTA Center for Family Engagement to give you a little bit of a research to practice and policy perspective on family engagement, and particularly family engagement in the current pandemics. As someone who spent my career researching, building, and evaluating family engagement at the national, state, and local levels, I'm going to talk to you about two main things. So what the research says about high impact family engagement and how that translates really intentionally to the design of the Statewide Family Engagement Center program, and why, given all of this research, state level infrastructure for family engagement is so critical right now to ensure that all of our students are thriving and able to make up for what has been a very, very difficult year. Before I dive in, I want to tell you just a little bit about National PTA's commitment to family engagement. As some of you may know, we're the oldest and largest child advocacy association, today representing over 3 million members across the country. We know the potential of parents to make every child's potential a reality. We live it every day. But we also know that not all practices and policies for family engagement are designed with impact in mind. Recognizing the growing research on high impact family engagement and feeling the call to action to meet the needs of our changing demographics, this is why we launched the Center for Family Engagement in 2018. National PTA has made this investment, and we continue to call on policymakers to do the same. We know it matters. A 2008 study found that schools would need to increase spending by more than $1,000 per pupil to gain the same results as high impact family engagement. For every kid across America, that's over a $53 billion value for the investment in family engagement. So what does that investment yield when it comes to results? Ambika talked a little bit about this, but we know from decades of research that family engagement has an important impact on students, from high grades and test scores to attendance and graduation rates to decreased behavioral issues and high-risk behaviors. What's less frequently discussed, and I want to share a little bit about just because it's such a kind of key part of what built the Statewide Family Engagement Program, is some of the research on the benefits of family engagement for schools themselves. So a study by the Consortium of Chicago School Research finds that teachers are more likely to remain in schools where they're able to develop trusting relationships with families. This is especially important now as the pandemic is having a potentially detrimental impact on the teacher workforce, the full impact of which we all still do not fully understand. These same research also found that schools that were intentional around family engagement efforts were more likely to improve, and to do so at similar rates to schools that invested in principal and teacher quality, curriculum, and student supports. Family engagement is an under-leveraged strategy for improving schools and ensuring our teachers feel supported and happy to continue in their jobs. As I mentioned, the field of family engagement has also evolved significantly over the past decade. There's more research on implementation, including evidence of promising practices. Many of us may be familiar with great models for parent training. Actually, National Centers for Family Learning has done some great work. Ambika mentioned some of that. And there's also other parts of this work that are part of the systemic approach of the Statewide Family Engagement Centers. So what are systemic approaches? I'd encourage you all, if you're not familiar, to check out the Dual Capacity Building Framework for Family, School, and Community Partnerships, authored by Dr. Karen Mapp, where we can go a lot more detail into much of this. But these systemic approaches build the capacity of school leaders and teachers. And why is that important? We know from research, for example, from the National Network of Partnership Schools, that principal support for family engagement is associated with higher quality family engagement programs, which in turn lead to better student outcomes. We also know from another research organization, Westat, that teachers who do a couple of key things, having positive and frequent communication with families and providing learning tips to families, have students who achieve at 40% and 50% higher levels than those who don't. Yet, both principals and teachers continue to rate some of the biggest challenges of the work above school discipline, school funding, many things, as engaging families. And they both receive little, if any, training to help them utilize these evidence-based practices at scale. Another key piece of systemic approaches, as Ambika mentioned, is some of the communication and data systems that facilitate homeschool partnerships. National PTA is really proud to be a partner with Learning Heroes, who's conducted research showing some of the disconnect between how schools and statewide education agencies have shared information with families on student progress and school quality, and how families actually understand that information. We know from behavioral research, too, that using things like texting services that nudge and ask questions and share information with families can help them monitor and improve things like student attendance. Yet, scaling these approaches takes significant expertise and relationships with schools. All of this research is behind the design of the Statewide Family Engagement Center program, which focuses on these systemic approaches. And you're going to get to hear from Roger more about what that looks like in practice. The Statewide Family Engagement Center program builds capacity for states and school districts to systematically embed family engagement in their education plans. They provide much needed professional development for educators and school leaders to strengthen family-school partnerships and parent-teacher relationships. And the SFEC program provides those direct services to families to give them the tools they need to be effective partners with their child's school to improve academic outcomes and lots of other important outcomes. I also want to talk to you a little bit about why states, right? So we could go and just say, let's scale all the great programs on the ground at the national level, but states and statewide family engagement centers are really critical. You heard from Ambika at Carnegie Corporation of New York about how philanthropy is stepping up to scale some of these approaches, including supporting the Statewide Family Engagement Center Professional Development Network. States are an important part of the education ecosystem when it comes to family engagement. The Statewide Family Engagement Centers are helping contextualize all these evidence-based practices to some of the specific priorities that are emerging in communities. They range from family literacy to the opioid epidemic to choice and everything in between. But they all have a common and systemic focus that not only addresses parents, but also the public institutions that they and we are all a part of. We cannot talk about supporting principals and teachers to engage families without these public institutions. Statewide education agencies are an integral part to the Statewide Family Engagement Center work. Statewide education agencies need to be able to shepherd our federal investments in family engagement, like our Title I funding and set-asides, wisely, but there can sometimes be a disconnect. In 2009, a study funded by the Institute for Educational Sciences found that only about 4% of schools with family engagement in their improvement plans actually included programs that were aligned to research around some of the important roles parents play. We need partners like the Statewide Family Engagement Centers who've built robust coalitions, including with parent groups like PTA and others, to bring these evidence-based models to the table. They can suggest approaches and programs that we know work and work with families and bring them to scale and fill an important niche with our statewide education agencies to amplify their impact. This also includes helping connect community partners to schools so that families can be supported. And this partnership has been critical during the pandemic, where statewide family engagement centers have pivoted, like many of us, to meet our community's needs. High impact family engagement is supported by the Family Engagement Center program is critical to ensuring students are attending classes and receiving support at home, mitigating the expected learning loss due to COVID-19. Parents will continue to play the role of facilitator while much of our instruction is online, making family engagement even more critical than before. PTA is grateful to Congress for its initial investment in the Statewide Family Engagement Center program and to Congressman Yarmouth and DeSaulnier for their championing of this work. This investment is changing lives and we are supportive of all of your efforts to continue expanding this investment. Thank you again, Josh, and thank you all.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks for the PTA's national leadership and family engagement. You guys are always there to support all of this work. Next up, I would like to introduce Roger Garcia. Roger is the director of the Statewide Family Engagement Center in Nebraska. Roger, could you share with us a little bit about your thoughts on how that Family Engagement Center is operating and the importance that it carries at this point in time?
Sure, definitely. First, I want to thank Congressman Yarmouth and DeSaulnier for their support of family engagement efforts, and of course my fellow panelists and everybody joining us today virtually. You know, it really is my honor to share with you a little bit about the Statewide Family Engagement Center in Nebraska. This SFEC grant, as we like to call it, is part of a Department of Education effort at the federal level. The grant that we have here in Nebraska was awarded to the National Center for Families Learning in October 2018. So we're about 2 years into this grant at this point. And it's led to the implementation of a network of family literacy sites across the entire state. And if you've seen the state of Nebraska, it's pretty big, but we've made an effort to geographically expand from east to west, north to south, to really have touch points across the entire state with family literacy. Alongside those sites, we've implemented professional development opportunities for our local educators, really adding support for our local teachers and school districts to provide professional development that not only trains our teachers, but also we're getting input from them. What kind of support do you need? What topics do you want to learn about? So we've done surveys to glean and get info on what they want to learn about so we can provide those opportunities now and in the future. And aside from those efforts, we also have built an online resource center at nebraskasfec.com that is new, but ever growing every week with new resources, toolkits, and webinars where people can access all of our webinars from the past and a lot of different resources for not just educators, but also families to log on and get support there as well. All of these efforts combined lead up to our advisory committee, which is guiding our efforts and is made up of 50% parents as well. So the expansion of family literacy in Nebraska is really a substantial leap in our local efforts of family engagement and supporting families. And I know that personally, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But first, let me talk a little about family literacy briefly. It brings together the elements of first adult education, where we have parents actually go into their schools where their child is attending to attend adult education classes. So it could be GED classes, could be learning English, could be vocational certificates like a CNA certificate or other many vocational certificates that they can get, or even post-secondary education if they want to go for a full associate's degree or onwards to a bachelor's degree. So that would be the adult education component. And I just want to briefly mention that when we do adult education, we don't just assume that they need English classes or they need this or they need that. We actually survey our parents first. What do you want to learn about? If you had an opportunity to advance your education, what would you like to pursue? So we survey them first so that the program that we create is catered to what they actually want and desire. We also have them come together during what we call parent time, where they're starting to build kind of some camaraderie, some cohort kind of environment where they come together, not so much in the formal kind of adult education environment, but more just parents together learning. What do you want to learn about that's more of a casual topic like healthy cooking, budgeting at home, maybe parenting and disciplining as well. You know, whatever topic that they want to learn about outside of the formal education system, we have them come together for parent time to learn about different topics and build that camaraderie as parents. And the last component that we implement is pack time, which is where the parents go into the school again to spend time with their kids in the classroom, getting to know the teacher, but also doing reading and literacy activities with their own children in the classroom during the school day. So those three components come together to complement children's education, which is the fourth component of family literacy. That component is already in place because clearly our local school districts are providing children's education, but we support that component through, again, the professional development to support our teachers, and also the components come together to really complement each other and build what we call family literacy. Family literacy, the research has shown, leads up to better attendance, tackling those truancy issues that some of our school districts have. It also leads to better reading levels and also academic performance in general. And with the educational advancement of parents and families, both at two-generation level, we see that economic and educational advancement very clearly with both parents and children. So I mentioned that personally, I really can relate to what we're doing here because in the mid-90s, I myself grew up in Nebraska during a different time. You know, my mom was a single mother from Honduras and moved to the States in the early 80s, and then we moved to Nebraska in the mid-90s. Back then, there were no bilingual liaisons. There were no translators, even for parent-teacher conferences, and definitely no programs that were kind of culturally responsive to a parent like mine and many parents out there. So my mom, luckily, was able to find some English classes at a local library at that time. She was also able to find some support for citizenship classes to pursue her citizenship at a different nonprofit. But her engagement at my local school was very minimal due to the different barriers that we faced as a family. This is how I know personally that family literacy is such a tremendous enhancement to how our local schools engage and support our families in Nebraska. It is thanks to the SFEC grant that we now have been able to expand family literacy to 9 school districts, and we're going to go to 12 school districts by next year in year 3 of the grant. So, you know, we've gone from the mid-90s where really it was non-existent, any kind of support to support our diverse families from different backgrounds, different languages, to high intensity, high duration family literacy programming. So I'm really proud to be leading that effort along with my colleagues. So now, the pandemic has definitely made programming difficult, of course, for many of us in our schools or for our families, having to take pretty much all the elements of family literacy to virtual programming during this moment in time. This has revealed barriers and disparities with families not having access to internet sometimes at home, to not having the proper technology to engage fully with virtual learning and programming, and just having to deal with the stresses of the pandemic. You know, even if all of our programming is online via Zoom, you know, some of our parents, many of our parents, myself as a parent as well, we're stressed out. You know, we don't always want to be on Zoom, and sometimes we can't always be on Zoom. We have to cook, we have to take care of our kids, and a lot is going on. But luckily, we truly have seen that our families in our family literacy programs that have been in our program for a year or two at this point, they were really better prepared to navigate this pandemic. They had already established relationships with our local school staff. Many of them had already engaged with local school portals online to learn how to register their kids online, because many of our schools are now doing 100% virtual registration. So we had worked with our parents already to access those portals, to learn who their principal, their counselor, their teachers were. And many have been empowered to simply advocate for their own children's education to ensure that their child doesn't fall behind during these times. So the families I have the honor of serving through this grant, I have seen complete, you know, such high achievements in a short period of time. You know, we have parents in South Sioux City that have been able to go to the local community college, never having set foot on any kind of college, and get their CNA certificate within 1 or 2 semesters. You know, I have parents in Lincoln, Nebraska that we have upwards of 11 different languages in the same classroom, all learning English together, which is incredible. And from parents from Latin America, from Northeast Africa, from the Middle East, and so many different countries and backgrounds, refugees, immigrants, even some Native parents that have grown up here in the Midwest, all together learning. It's an amazing sight, truly. So these successes and many more all make up the SFEC grant, which again is federally funded through the Department of Education. And I'm really grateful for being able to lead this effort with my colleagues and to expand family literacy in Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, for that personal and professional reflection and giving us a window into the great work that you all are doing in Nebraska. I have started to get a few questions, and so I'll try to address the panel members who I think are most important to answer them. Although I do see that Congressman John Yarmuth has just joined us. And so, hello, Congressman, it's good to see you. Josh at the National Center for Families Learning. And I guess I would just say by way of introduction, Congressman John Yarmuth is a lifelong champion of literacy and a great friend to NCFL. He also happens to be a native of Louisville, Kentucky, which is where NCFL is headquartered and where I'm speaking to you from today. So Congressman Yarmuth, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thanks, Josh, and thanks to all of you for participating in this very important program. We're obviously dealing in a context that we'd rather not be. We'd all rather be together, and being able to have that personal touch, and hopefully we can return to that soon. But in the meantime, as I've been saying a lot recently, we should all think positive and test negative. That's what we're all about these days. We are in the middle of a caucus meeting where we're selecting committee chairs, so I have very little time to spend with you, but I also have very little to contribute. So that works out well. All I can say is, it's a great honor to represent Louisville, Kentucky, and because I get to work with some incredible people and some incredible advocacy groups, NCFL being right at the top of the list, and to work with Josh and my dear friend Sharon Darling over all these years has been one of the most special opportunities that I've had during my tenure in Congress, because what NCFL does is so fundamental to the success of our society and to our future. And I've been at some of the programs that NCFL runs in Louisville and seen families learning together, and in many cases kids teaching parents. And it's really one of the most inspirational things that you can possibly experience. We know that the world is changing so rapidly. The tools for success in the world that we're approaching are going to be very different in many respects. But we know the one fundamental tool that will never change is literacy, and how critical that is to whatever we do. So I want to thank you once again for staying involved in this incredibly important challenge. And I want to thank my friend, Mark Desagnier, who is a great colleague and a great friend, and just a wonderful guy. And thank you, Mark, for being involved in this as well. So I'll just say carry on. Thanks again to all of you here. And please know that there are a lot of people in Congress who are very, very committed to helping you in the achievement of your objectives. And those are objectives for all of us in the United States. So, and around the world, to be honest. So anyway, thanks again. And thanks for letting me say a few words. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Congressman. We appreciate your support of literacy efforts and statewide family engagement centers. You're always fighting the good fight.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
All right. So back to some of the questions that some of you had. One question, I think this goes to Ambika. Ambika, a participant today wants to know more about where to access the family engagement tools that you described.
Sure. I was able to take a look at the questions, and I have put on the chat a couple of links to some organizations that have resources. But there are a wide range of resources available from digital learning resources, from Common Sense Media. They have a website called Wide Open School, which curates resources by grade level from K through 12 around various topic areas, whether it's literacy, math, science, and even other extracurricular resources that you might need to, if kids are interested in robotics, like, to do a family, as a family, some resources that you could do work with at home, but also how you could use those resources to start a conversation with your child's teacher. There are lots of resources that the PTA has that Helen talked about, but we recommend them too. There are resources that I mentioned from the family guides that Seek Common Ground and Student Achievement Partners have developed. Like, how do you know by end of each grade level how your child should be performing? There's another tool that similar to that called the Readiness Check that was developed by Learning Heroes, how you can actually work with your child to check in literacy and math if they're performing at grade level, and how to begin a conversation with your child's teacher about getting additional resources or support. The last one I'll tell you about, because there's a whole host of them, is by Ed Navigator, the organization that I mentioned. They are put together a weekly guide that you can sign up for. It's free, where they tell you about how to navigate, how to ask questions about digital resources, social emotional issues, and of course, academic resources. They send you information weekly during the pandemic, but they also send you resources on how to actually navigate school systems, who to ask, where to get the information that you might need. So that's a great resource. It's called the Kinda Guide. And I put that in the chat as well.
Thanks, Ambika. And I would just take this opportunity to also note on behalf of the larger SFEC network that many of the states have developed resource lists. Certainly NCFL has some of those as well on our national site, also in Nebraska and Arizona. So it's a nice byproduct of the SFEC effort. You know, these days we can access those resources from anywhere. Another couple questions that I saw come in. One is pretty straightforward, so I'll just answer it. There's a question of, does every state have a family engagement center? And the answer to that is no. We need every state to have a statewide family engagement center. That's part of what this conversation is about. But today there are 12 grant awards, which is a great start, but we know that we need them in every state. Another question, and I'll ask for Helen and Roger maybe to reflect on this from a national perspective and then in the state of Nebraska. The question is, can Title I funds be used to fund family engagement and family literacy? And so maybe Helen, do you just want to start with what you're hearing about that? I mean, the short answer is yes, but what have you heard about that? And then Roger, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that in Nebraska. Sure.
Yes. As with all things, this is always up to interpretation of the Federal Register, but that would fall under a high impact family engagement activity, most definitely. And I think that one of the things we're hearing is many schools pivoting to use more virtual platforms to engage families. And this is not just true of schools, but PTA as well, right? As well as build additional infrastructure. Roger mentioned some of this, so you could probably go into more detail around things like facilitating with distribution of food potentially to families, or bringing materials to families along with the food distribution network in communities where schools are still closed. So I think that there's some really creative things that are happening on the ground as part of that. Roger, what do you want to add?
Well, it's a very timely question because we're going to have a workshop on this exact topic very soon here. So Title I, Title IV, WIOA funds can all go towards family literacy, but we're going to break that down in a lot more detail. If you go to NCFL Nebraska on Facebook or NebraskaSFEC.com, we're going to upload the flyer and registration link. We are having a workshop on Tuesday, December 15th at, I believe it's 11 a.m. Central, yeah, 11 a.m. Central. We work in all time zones. We are having a workshop with the law firm. Bruman is the short name. Josh, you can fill in the full name. I always forget. But they are experts in this area of using ESSA, AFLA, Title I, Title IV, WIOA funds, and how to use them towards family literacy and family engagement programming. And so we're going to have somebody who is well-versed in the legality of this area in that workshop, presenting for a little over an hour on how to actually do that. So please check out, again, Facebook, NCFL Nebraska, or our local website, NebraskaSFEC.com for the details on that workshop.
Thanks, Roger. The law firm is Brewstein and Manassabit is the full name, and they are absolute experts in how to help leverage federal funding. Another question that has come up, and I think several of you probably will have some reflection on this. I guess we could start with Helen, but terms that we throw out, all of us have said high impact family engagement. What are the key characteristics of high impact family engagement to somebody who isn't necessarily in this field?
Sure, I can kick us off, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of expertise in the room on this. So one thing is that it is linked to student learning. So that has been shown over and over again. So whether that's focused on reading or focused on where students are progress-wise, there is sort of a direct connection to student learning. So that's a key characteristic of high impact. Another one is that it's relational, right? So I have always said you can't necessarily have a difficult conversation with your child's teacher about your kid being behind, not being able to add unlike denominators if you've never met your child's teacher or had a conversation with them or believe fundamentally that you all are on the same team. There's some great models. Ambika mentioned some of them. I think we've got academic parent-teacher teams that might be on the call, parent-teacher home visits that both build community among parents, relationships among parents, as well as relationships between families and those that are inside the school. So the relational piece and the learning piece are the first two I'll start with to kick us off down the chain.
I can add to that. I mean, Helen, we think of it the same way. I mean, in terms of the relational piece as well, and linked to student learning. And we take it one step further. We went deeper to see what, we talk about bridging the gap between home and school. That relational piece, what does that look like, that co-creation or that partnership between home and school? So we highlighted through some research that we had done with the Global Family Research Center around 5 higher leverage areas, and they are attendance, digital media, data sharing, like how do you know how your child is actually performing, and additional support around academic and social development, and the transition space. So what I mean by the transition space is around, looking at information, getting your child from pre-K to kindergarten, and then elementary to middle school, and even, access to information for high school and post-secondary pathways. So we think that relational piece around these 5 leverage areas constitutes like high leverage family engagement.
Thanks, Ambika and Helen. Roger, do you want to add to the definition of high impact family engagement?
Yeah, many times when we're doing new, what we call implementation training, when we're onboarding a new school district to do family literacy, some of them have never done family literacy or high impact family engagement. And so I use a continuum that my colleague, Dr. Getzinger, created at NCFL headquarters. And it has 3 points to start with, and then the 4th can be family literacy being very intense. So the first point on this kind of a map that she has is just doing basic communication. If maybe you just want to communicate better with your families as a starting point in family engagement, then maybe you create a newsletter in multiple languages. Maybe you start doing some more emailing to families, so maybe some phone calls to families. Maybe you start to get a little more robust on social media to engage families on social media a little bit more. So it's kind of enhancing your communication as a first starting point that maybe needs a little enhancement. But from there, you can maybe take it towards what she would call family involvement. So maybe in family involvement, you're having parents maybe volunteer once a semester, maybe volunteer a few times a semester. Maybe they're also donating towards the field trip that's coming up for the band, the choir, something of that nature. Maybe a little more volunteering, a little donating. So just involving the family a little bit more than just simply trying to communicate with them. From there, the map takes us to family engagement. So in family engagement, they're really, families are a lot more engaged. So it's not just an occasional volunteer activity. Maybe we have a really robust, awesome PTA group at the local elementary school, or local school in general. Maybe there's actually some components of family literacy being implemented, like for example, adult education. For example, in Crete, Nebraska, we just onboarded a school that was doing adult education with GED and English classes, very robust program with dozens of parents participating every year, but they didn't have the full family literacy components, just that one adult education piece. And so parents were really engaging with the school, especially with adult education. So that would be the 4th point, family engagement. Then if you want to take it to a really high intensity level, you could do family literacy. So with family literacy, we have parents in the school literally 8 to 10 hours a week. This is obviously when we're not in a pandemic, but 8 to 10 hours a week in the school. So that's a lot of commitment for our parents to be there doing parent time, building a kind of a cohort with other parents, doing adult education with other parents in the school as well, doing pack time where they come read and do literacy activities with their children during the school day as well. All of that adding up to 8 to 10 hours a week. So that's a lot of intensity for our parents. And of course, not everybody can do it depending on kind of work schedules, but there's also a lot of flexibility with family literacy that if you want to build it more towards the late afternoon, early evening, you can do that. If you want to build it more towards the early morning when they're dropping off kids and maybe they can stay a couple hours for some parent time, some adult education, you can do it that way as well, or both, you know. So that's the continuum that I usually talk about.
Thanks, Roger. Questions are starting to pile up a little bit here, so I'll try to get to as many as we can. This is a pretty specific question about full service community schools, which is another federal program that attempts to make the school the center of the neighborhood and include services all along the lifespan. What are some key partnerships or strategies to pursue to improve family engagement through the full service community school? So I don't know, Helen, do you feel comfortable with that?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. And I think I'd encourage folks to check out the Coalition for Community Schools at the Institute for Educational Leadership, which also has some great resources, and they house a family and community engagement network for district leaders. So they will have much more expertise than me. I would say one of the things, and you heard Roger talk about this, but just to pull it out, that's another piece of high impact, and I think is sort of the next level of work for full service community schools, is this dual capacity focus, right? So we're both really supporting, training, empowering parents to be the best partners and advocates for their child, and also fundamentally reworking the school system. Roger, I think you said you're working with 12 districts in Nebraska, so that the school districts and schools and people in schools themselves are ready to be good partners for parents, right? Who are often banging at the door saying, I just want to know how to support my kid. So I think that's an important way to sort of take it to the next level with a lot of sort of traditional community schools model, which are very focused and great at doing some of that parent work and have the relationships inside schools to say, you know, how can we get our teachers to be sharing information regularly with families about how students are doing? How can we transform, you know, what might be a pickup drop-off schedule into a time where families are getting the opportunity to connect with one another and with the educators and school leaders in the building? So that sort of school side of the dual capacity focus, I think, is an interesting area to sort of go further.
Thank you. And I think this one probably goes to Roger. The question is, how will the family engagement programs involve other caretakers outside of the family, such as a grandparent or community member?
Yeah, many times when we're trying to explain how our program is two generation or multiple generation approach, we definitely mentioned that the generation that is above the child, so to speak, many times is the biological parent, but not always. You know, it could be grandparents, it could be an aunt or an uncle, a foster parent, an adoptive parent, you know, whoever is the main caregiver for the child, whether it's grandparent or otherwise, can be the lead person to participate in family literacy in our schools. So it doesn't always have to be the parent, but if it is the parent and other family members want to participate in some of the programming, there is possibility there. Many times with our grant and our evaluation, you know, the touch points are kind of tracking how the parents are or that main caregiver is doing in regards to their programming side of things and how the child is doing in regards to their academic performance and attendance. So in some senses, there are limitations when we're doing kind of evaluation with a very complex federal grant, but in other ways, our schools have managed to bring in other family members to engage in some of their engagement activities. For example, you know, South Sioux City is looking at doing kind of a family fair during the semester that our family literacy parents are leading and coordinating themselves, building up their leadership skills and coordination skills. But that would be open to all family members. That would be open to other families who are not in the family literacy program, but bringing them in, not necessarily just to recruit them into family literacy, but just to build a robust family engagement environment in the school there in South Sioux City. So there's many ways to engage other family members. As far as community members and community partners in general, we do bring in a lot of nonprofits, a lot of community partners to come speak to our parents during parent time. So parent time, again, is kind of doing workshops about whatever the parent wants to learn about. It doesn't have to be anything formal like GED classes. It could just be, again, budgeting at home. It could be healthy cooking. It could be disciplining and parenting at home with your child. So we bring in a lot of community partners and community members during that time to interact and engage with our parents.
Thank you, Roger. Ambika, do you have anything quickly that you want to add around caregiver engagement? You know, those members of a family who may not be immediately thought of.
I would say from what we've been supporting, we see that as a really important priority too. So it's not just, you know, family members might be working. You know, parents might be working or may not be available. So we're looking at efforts, even some of the examples that I shared earlier, whether it's the Kinder Guide during the pandemic or the readiness check. It could be any caregiver that signs up to access that information. And I think that what we are sort of pushing for is going back to what Helen said, that relational piece with home and school. It's very often, you know, it's just the parent who the school communicates with, but it's the caregiver or an older sibling that might need to be the connecting person that you know will help support the child. So we believe in that too, but I don't have any specific examples other than some of the ones that I just mentioned.
All right. Well, thank you, Ambika. Well, as we kind of get close to the end here, I would just ask the panelists, do any of you have a brief final word that you'd like to share with attendees?
Okay. We're all looking at each other. I'll be first and brief, which is just you are appreciated. I know that there are a number of folks on the line who are family engagement practitioners and running statewide family engagement centers. We know you're working very hard to stay in touch with your communities and to meet their needs. And sometimes the needs feel overwhelming compared to the resources that are available. And so we appreciate what you're doing. And just thank you again. We're really proud to be a partner with the National Centers for Family Learning and everyone on this call to support this work.
I just want to also say a big thank you to the National Center for Families Learning, to the PTA, to Roger in the Statewide Center in Nebraska, and all of you on the webinar. You are the real experts doing the work on the ground, and we're really glad to be able to find ways to support this work and hopefully family engagement becomes a priority going forward, even more than it is now. Thank you.
Definitely, we appreciate the support, both the local, regional, and national level to not only implement programs like SFEC and other family engagement programs nationwide and locally, but to continue them for the long term. You know, we don't want to just start them up and for 3 to 5 years, but we want to make sure we sustain these programs for the long term because, you know, they're really doing wonders with our families and doing some amazing work out there. So thank you to everybody who support these efforts, and also to all the practitioners watching today. You know, we learn from each other. You know, while we're really proud of our family literacy model and the research behind it, we definitely learn from each other and can build better programs together. So please feel free to reach out at any time. Again, nebraskasfec.com and also Nebraska NCFL on Facebook. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all the panelists for your time as well as those of you in the audience. And again, thanks to our congressional champions for the Statewide Family Engagement Center program. You know, it takes leadership, and Congressman Yarmuth and DeSaulnier have provided that leadership so far. We're excited about the work that's been seeded to this point with support from Congress and philanthropic organizations like the Carnegie Corporation, as well as strong networks across the country. Our hope is that SFECs are just the beginning of creating high impact family engagement in every corner of the country, and especially for the families that need it the most, and that we can really build this program out so that all 50 states someday have a statewide family engagement center. So thanks to you all for your time. And I think with that, we will sign off.